Most of the Mexican grocery stores I know are just jam-packed with great ingredients. And sometimes you have to kind of look from high to low to find them. For instance, I found the dried corn for making pozole and for making the masa for tortillas way down here in the produce section. So there are two different varieties here. I've got the red corn and then the white corn. And this is what you would start with if you're going to make pozole from scratch. Now, I know probably a lot of you would just walk right past that, and you wouldn't know that you have to look around for the white powder, the cal, or the calcium hydroxide that will be sold right next to it, because this is what you'd cook the dried corn with. Now, I know most of you would say, oh, it's just easier to grab a can of hominy and work with that. But the texture and the flavor is completely different. Let me show you. In the old days, we had to put the pozole in water with the calcium hydroxide, and then we had to clean it and then cook it for hours and hours, usually about 4 hours for it to get tender. If you got an Instant Pot, it goes down to about an hour. So I'm going to show you how to do this. I know it's a really old-fashioned technique to be employing this wonderful modern technology, but it works like a charm. So we've got about a pound, that's 3 cups of the dried corn. Here I'm using the red corn that we bought at the market, and I'm going to put it into the Instant Pot. And then I've got the calcium hydroxide. I showed you a really big package of it, but look for the smallest one because this isn't something that you're going to be using a lot of. But you'll want to change it out of the package into something that you can store it in. And I'm going to put for that pound there, and a lot of people will do this by weight. It's 1% of the weight of that. But if you're doing volume measures, 3 cups of that to 2 teaspoons of this calcium hydroxide. And then I'm going to just make that into a little slurry, meaning that I'm going to dissolve the calcium hydroxide in the water. You want just enough water that you can actually get it to dissolve nicely there. Now that I've gotten that done, I'm going to take 8 cups of water and pour it in here. Add the slurry of calcium hydroxide, or cal, as they call it in Spanish. And there I'm going to turn the Instant Pot, not on pressure cook right now. I'm going to put it on sauté. And then it's going to start simmering. Okay, we're going to let this simmer for about 45 minutes. And what's going to happen during that time is that the hull of those kernels of corn is going to turn into sort of a gelatinous-like thing. In other words, we're going to take the pericarp and we're going to get rid of it by turning it gelatinous first. Then when it is at that stage, we'll be able to wash that off, and that will allow these corn kernels to then balloon up and become what we know to be hominy corn. It's been about 45 minutes. I've turned this off now. I just want to show you what this looks like, because this is the amount of liquid that you need. When you smell it, you'll be able to smell the reaction between the calcium hydroxide, the cal, and the corn. And it's really hot, so it's really hard to show you what I'm looking for. But all of the holes have loosened up, and they look filmy, and they're sticking to my fingers. But you know what? It's going to be better if I just dump this into a colander and I show you at the sink. Okay, so now you can kind of see as I'm washing it with my hands that I get all this sort of filmy stuff coming off into my hands here, and it sort of feels a little sticky. That's the part that we're trying to get off of here. That's that hull, what's called a pericarp. It's really the bran of these kernels of corn. Okay, back into the Instant Pot here. We've cleaned off all of the holes after cooking with the calcium hydroxide. And we're going to add 8 cups of liquid to this. That may seem like an awful lot of liquid, but remember, the next step with this would be to turn it into pozole. So you would be adding pork to it and so forth. But we're going to cook it until the corn kernels, the nixtamalized corn kernels, that's what you call it when it goes through that calcium hydroxide process. Okay, I'm going to cook this at high pressure for an hour and 15 minutes, and that will be enough to get very tender corn kernels rather than the 4 hours or so it would have taken on stove. Now, there's no real reason to just let this naturally release its steam, so we're going to do the really quick release of steam. You turn that steam release valve to venting, and you'll notice that there's a lot of steam coming up. This will take a couple of minutes for all of that steam to dissipate and the little valve that is in there to go down. Okay. Take the top off here. Now, this, of course, is not salted, so I'm going to add a couple of teaspoons of salt to this, and then stir that in. And then I want to show you what the texture of this corn is now. Okay, so you can see that it looks like hominy. If you've ever opened a can of hominy, these kernels have ballooned up to at least twice the size of what we started with, probably 3 times. And some of them have broken open a little bit, and that's going to make them really have a great texture to them. I mean, that's the whole thing about hominy, is its texture. But when you get the stuff in the can, it's always mushy to me. It doesn't have this home-cooked hominy kind of flavor and texture to it. There's just a lot more going on, both in texture and in flavor. With this, you're now ready to start making pozole.